It was built for the Horden Colliery, which was a new colliery built in about 1904 and built a new town and everything. And it was a big investment because they were going to dig out under the sea, and it was a sort of colliery they hadn't done before in the northeast. So it was a massive investment, and they didn't even have a railway line to it, but they sunk the shaft and they started working the colliery. And before they actually started drawing coal properly, they needed an engine. And because I hadn't even built the railway there, this engine had to be delivered to do work around the colliery. So the first interesting thing was, it came to Shotton, about 3 miles away, and to get it to the colliery, they had to take it along a public road. And there were no low loaders in those days. The only way they could do it was, they got 2 sets of rails. They laid rails in front of it at Shotton, at the goods yard where it was delivered by rail. And they steamed it and rolled it on another set of rails, lifted the rails behind, and it was a matter of lifting behind and laying the rails in front for the 3 miles from Shotton to Horden. And they did it in 2 days, which I think was a staggering effort. But unfortunately, I haven't got any pictures of that, but we know that 1 or 2 people have, because they said there's a photograph taken of the engine in the high street in front of the shops in Horden. We would love to see that. Anyway, they got the engine there, and they were able to start completing the pit, and within about another year the mainline railway had arrived and turning out coal. And it was, I said it was a serious investment, it was a major project, but it was so large it became the largest colliery in Europe, if not the world. And it's said by some people that at one time there was 7,000 men employed there. It's just staggering how large it was. So this became an essential part of the colliery. Now there's a lot of history and photographs of the colliery, but sadly the whole site is being destroyed. There's possibly a pit wheel. It seems mandatory in Durham pit villages to have a pit wheel. But nothing else left of the pit apart from photographs and stories, except this. This is the sole tangible part of the colliery that has survived. When you think the thousands of people for decades working there, of Europe's largest pit, this is all that's left. So we think it's important. So it's got a great story to tell in that respect. Well, it wasn't built locally. It was built by Andrew Barclay in Kilmarnock, who also made other equipment for the colliery, because they built steam winding engines and things, and had a terrible job of delivering stuff like that as well. But Andrew Barclay's built quite a lot for County Durham and Northumberland in colliery equipment. So I don't know whether they put in the lowest bid or what, but they had a reputation for extremely good equipment. So they supplied this engine, and it wasn't just the smallest of shunters you could have got. Luckily for us, it's a 6-wheeler. Most engines this size are 4-wheelers, but 6-wheelers, they carry more water and coal, so they can start doing decent journeys like we do on our railway. Yeah. So there are a few Barclay engines left, but we like to think this is the best one. And we're putting the engine back as near as possible to the original condition. There's a lot of original material left, but after running for, I think it was 69 years, actually spanned the era from the first manned flight by the Wright brothers to Concorde, and this thing was doing the same job all that time. But a lot of damage. It had a head-on collision with the British Railways engine in the 1960s, so it was very bent at the front end. We had to straighten that out. But with wear and tear, the wheels were in such a state, we had to remove the tyres, put new tyres on, new crank pins, new suspension, new brake gear. I could go on and on. The motion, the bearings replaced, work on the cylinders and pistons, new piston rods, work on the new tube plate in the boiler, various other bits in the boiler. It's remarkable how much stuff we had to do, but we're kind of proud of that, because if we can tackle this, we can tackle anything. So the engine's going to be more or less as built, as good as new. I think there might be 1 or 2 bruises on it, but then we want reminders that actually it worked for its living. It's been a proper working engine. It's done a real strong, heavy job for 69 years. The Horden Colliery Company, which was created to sink this big pit, also bought an old pit at Shotton, just 3 miles away, which had been abandoned. They reopened that pit. So this engine spent a lot of years at Shotton Colliery as well. And it was working at Shotton when Shotton pit closed. That's when we managed to acquire the locomotive. when we tried to take the engine away, we managed to get the engine almost on the low loader. And it was rather difficult, I should say, to get it loaded, because the only place we could load the engine was on the level crossing at the end of the high street in Shotton. So we quite upset the bus services and everything else, because it took the best part of an hour with the roadblock. But the engine was more or less on the low loader, and unfortunately the winch on the low loader broke, and the engine ran off the low loader down the ramp, and there was a vehicle going over the level crossing this time. It happened to be a brand new NCB van, which had pushed sideways down the line. I felt dreadfully sorry for the man who was driving it. I don't know what state he was in. But the van was a write-off. It was crushed. One of the buffers was through the passenger window of the van. And everybody at the colliery said, well, it's been here that long, the engine doesn't want to go, does it? The bearings and wheels and everything were so worn, the engine had settled down to such an extent that two of the wheels were actually coming through this boarding, the foot plating as we call it. And when you see photographs of the engine, it was in such a state, it was leaning over. It was just wear and tear. It was staggering how much the suspension, the axle box bearings, the springs, everything was worn. So we're quite pleased we've been able to replace all of this. Because what I haven't said is that after we saved this engine, we couldn't keep her under cover. So for the best part of 40 years, this engine stood out in the rain. Weeds growing, grass around the wheels, thick with rust. Bits of the cab and the coal bunker were rotted away completely. You would have said what a hopeless case. But we decided it was going to be ideal for the Tanfield Railway, just the right size for our trains. An important piece of local history. We're going to have a go at it, and we've proved we can do it. Well, I think we have. We're nearly there. Generally, engines like this in this condition, you'd be talking of hundreds of thousands. But because we've got our own workshop facilities and we've got skilled people to do the work, we've trained up a lot of people, we've done nearly everything ourselves. Like most railways, if they wanted new tyres fitting, they'd have to go to specialists and pay tens of thousands of pounds probably. But we managed to get hold of some old tyres, and we've remachined them, shrunk them on, and all the difficult problems, because we've got a wheel lathe amongst all the other major tools we have. We can do just about, we like to think we can do just about everything. There have been a few jobs. There was a bit of work on the boiler where we weren't happy with our ability to do the quality of riveting because of our equipment being not quite up to spec we would like. So we got somebody to do some riveting on the boiler. But I think we've done the rest ourselves, so it's saved a lot of money. It does take a lot of time, but also you learn a lot from doing it. I've got to say, a lot of retired people who worked on it, but there are some people who are a lot younger who've had the opportunity to do works like machining the wheels and the axles. They were done by some people in their 20s, so it was a good exercise for them to learn how to use a wheel lathe and do detailed work. A lot of jobs have been done by the younger people. I think they'd have done a lot more if they didn't have to go to work or to college 5 days of the week. It looks nearly finished, but actually you probably noticed the copper pipework's all missing. Sad to say, we've had a theft, and it's the copper pipes, most of them going back to 1904, were stolen. And some of the worst ones were the ones that go in the smoke box that connect the boiler at the cylinders. People don't normally see them, are inside there, but they're nearly 4 inches diameter, and we can't get pipe of that correct specification. So at the moment we don't know what we're going to do, but we know it's going to be expensive. We need the money. The rest of the pipe work isn't cheap. We can source that. But parts of pipe work, it's not just plain copper pipe, it's old-fashioned heavy walled pipe, and on the ends it has bronze flanges to bolt together. All these flanges have to be made and brazed on. These are not cheap items. I think if we went to get somebody to make all these things commercially, we'd be paying more than £20,000. We're going to do it ourselves, but we have to get castings, we have to buy the pipe. It's going to take us a long time. We still need several £1,000s. And we're a bit tight for money at the moment. Unfortunately, we're not running trains, so we can't. So we really want, if people can help, please help. Yeah, every penny counts.